What's up, guys? I'm Brooke Entz. I am a CrossFit Games athlete, health and fitness influencer, businesswoman, and also actress, believe it or not.
And I'm Gina Chancharulo, and I'm none of those things. No, but I am a mother of four and a gym owner, and Brooke and I are best friends.
We're best friends.
And we like to just sit and
get real about all things fitness, life,
and
female,
all the things in between.
And all the things in between.
So check us out.
Yeah, check us out.
Between the Reps with Brooke and Gina.
You can get our podcast anywhere you get your podcasts.
You are listening to Any Given Sunday, a part of the Dead End Podcast Network. Please subscribe to our podcast on Apple, Spotify, Google, and all other podcasting services. Please make sure you check out Dead End Hip Hop, Dead End Sports, Dead End Gaming, Is the Mic Still On, Chris Platt's Strictly Hip Hop and Hoops Talk, and a host of other shows on our podcast network. Thank you for listening and enjoy the show. You are listening to Any Given Sunday, the Monday edition. For Monday, June 15th, 2020, I am your host, Manny Brown. What's up, everybody? Hopefully you guys are having a happy, safe, blessed week. Back with another episode of the podcast. And my guest this week is a guy that I've wanted to have on the show for a while. Just unfortunately, life and timing, and you know how it is being an adult out here in this world. Things get in the way, and it was just haven't, not because of lack of effort, right? Just things have gotten in the way. You know, poor timing. But we're here today. We finally got a chance to do this, finally got a chance to collab. My man, Rory Mitchell, host of the very popular, very successful Mitchell Report Unleashed. What's going on, Rory? Welcome to Any Given Sunday for the very first time.
Thank you. I love the way that you did your introduction. And Any Given Sunday, I feel like it's not even feeling like Sunday, but where's Willie Beeman? Where's Al Pacino? You know, I thought they would be in attendance with us. You know what I mean? But we're here. It's just been a long time coming, my friend. And, you know, the midst of a pandemic and protest and no sports and just keep creating, my guy. So, yeah, I'm happy to be here.
Absolutely, man. We share the same mindset, man. The work doesn't stop just because COVID has gotten in the way of things. Mm-hmm. We're still creating. We're still doing content. So, yeah, man. No, absolutely. It's been a long time coming. Pleasure to have you on the show. No Al Pacino, unfortunately. I'm sorry, but
no Willie Beeman.
No Willie Beeman either. Although I'll do my best. I'll do my best to to give you some Willie Beeman vibes.
Sounds good.
Cool. So, like I said, I always wanted to have you on the podcast. I'm a huge fan of your show. And since this is your first time on the show, I always like to give my first time guests a couple minutes to kind of introduce themselves to the audience that may not be familiar with them, may not have listened to the show. If you haven't listened to the show, you should. It's a awesome podcast, and he'll tell you why you should listen to a show. So, Rory, take this time to introduce yourself to the AGS Nation.
All right, my man. Well, over here in Canada, some people would say Drake country, Justin Bieber country, whatever you want to call it. I just grew up in this world, man, and just had a different perspective, I feel, on life. And that's where the podcast came from. Not to get too long-winded, you know, it started back in 2016. Just decided to approach things differently, have a message, have a soundboard on a podcast, have my audience, have the special guests come on, connect, unleash. That's the whole point, the unleash part, and just talk about almost everything. You know, I didn't want to just create a sports show. I wanted to make a society and culture type of show, because when you think about it, our society and culture all coexist with one, you know what I mean? Especially with, you know, what's going on right now. So been doing it for 3.5 years, and we're now going into episode 220 as of Thursday coming, you know what I mean? So it's been a constant grind, and elevation is a must, you know what I mean? And I always say this about creation and creators is just do it, you know?
Yeah.
I feel like too many times, especially on social media and things like that, and I've kind of distanced myself a little bit from some of the conversations that are happening, because you gotta, if you want to elevate yourself, my man, I see you doing it. I see you showing a lot of transparency in the content and even what you post on Instagram and social media. You can't be the type of person to want to jump into certain conversations with people, especially when they have ill intent. As a creator, that's where you have to kind of come across and separate yourself. So that's what I do with my podcast, my platform, and things like that.
Awesome. No, I feel it. Me and you kind of have similar stories. Started the podcast for kind of same general reasons. We've been doing it about the same amount of time. So yeah, that when you were telling your story there, that triggered a lot in me too about how I started my podcast. So it's good to know that you kind of went to some of the same kind of, I don't want to say soul searching, but just kind of realization that you had a voice and something to offer the platform. Absolutely. And the culture.
Absolutely.
So yeah, that's dope, man. That's dope. So yes, I know you got into it a little bit, but I guess what was ultimately your goal with starting the Mitchell Report? I know you kind of got into it a little bit in your introduction there, but like when you sat down and said, okay, I'm going to do this podcast, what was kind of ultimately your goal when you started it?
So before I created the podcast, I did a video and I gave a lot of thank you and a lot of acknowledgement to a lot of people in my inner circle. People have supported me, just networking. I've been networking for years now, and a lot of people don't know this story. So I'll kind of give you this kind of breaking news here. For the people that listen to me the first time, I used to blog. I used to have my own music blog and then, shut it down because of, just dealing with different people and things like that. And I said that through my time of being a personal trainer, being in the health and fitness industry, what's another way that I can attack and attract more viewers, more listeners, and kind of help people spread a positive message. And that's where the podcast came into play, my man. And it's just been from conversations from social injustice issues. That was one of my very first episodes to, talking about things that have been going on here in Canada, talking about mental health, you name it, man. It's just been continuing an upward, transcending way of just living and spreading the message out.
Awesome. And what's been the biggest challenge of podcasting so far? I mean, obviously you've done a music blog, you've created other content before. So obviously podcasting, while it's a different medium and a different forum, it's still content creation at the end of the day. But what's been the hardest part of that transition from blogging to podcasting?
When I first came into this, I won't lie, I didn't know how it was going to go. I was using my microphone and recording and trying to find, certain pitch tones and cadences and not to be so breathy in the mic. And over time and with confidence and just with working my 9 to 5 and, being in conversations with people and customers and guests and things like that, you get more of a what's the word I'm looking for? You get more confident in your way you want to talk, and how you articulate yourself. And at first there was sometimes I hit record and I'm just like, okay, I don't even know what I'm saying here. And I would just kind of fall back and then re-record. And I think every podcaster has gone through that. So with me, it's just now it keeps staying consistent. And that's not really a struggle, but it's like now to the point when you start recording and you start putting out your messages and you start connecting and networking, you then tend to kind of lose track of your days. And this is kind of where you're looking at, how can I bring a team in? How do I get somebody to do maybe those emails or, type up those business consultation things for other things that are going on? And, just kind of looking at building a team right now. So I think that's really a struggle, but everything's coming in due time, and I always talk about manifestation, how you want to manifest the life you want to live. You got to be 1% better. So if you put it out in the atmosphere, you put it out in the universe, all things are possible,
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So in turn, what has been the most satisfactory part of podcasting?
Oh, just connecting with the guests, man, talking. I'll say this, being a host is one thing, but when you get invited to come on other people's podcasts, it's a breath of fresh air because you don't really have to be listening to what's going on. You're getting now the questions presented to you. And I have a gift for gab. If people know me in my inner circle, best friends, things like that. I have a gift for gab. I love to speak. I love to talk. I like to engage, and that's the fun part of it. Just connecting, man.
I'm with you. I agree with you. I love coming on other people's podcasts because it makes my job a lot easier.
Yes, sir.
You know what I mean?
Yes, sir.
You know how it is when a host, you're preparing questions, you're doing research, you're worried about how you sound. I mean, you're doing all the tasks that are involved with, being a host of a podcast, and then, but when you're a guest, it's like, oh yeah, I just turn my mic on. I just sit down. What time are we doing this? Like, oh yeah, great. You know what I mean? Like it's a totally different vibe. So yeah, I totally agree with you.
Yes, sir.
I totally agree with you. So Canada, you're from Canada, born and raised. Tell me about growing up, living in Canada. You're my first guest from Canada, so that's kudos to you.
Yeah.
So tell me about Canada, man. How is it being from Drake country?
I love it. Here's what I'll say. It's not all about saying A or maple syrup. There's a lot. And I like how I played that off there. There's a lot with Canada, especially I'll start with Toronto. I think that for anybody that's from America or Europe or world, wherever you're in the world, visiting a part of Canada, I always say Toronto. Toronto's a big city, but you have places like British Columbia, Vancouver, places like that. Those are great tourist places. But me growing up in the small city that I came from, it's not like it's different than any other place. I think we are, as Canadians, very reserved in a lot of different ways we want to approach things. We're the peacekeeping country. We are I think some people crack these jokes and say that we have Mounties that, or police officers that ride on horses. No, it's not like that anymore. Yeah, sure, it was at one point, but now it's just living and, growing up here, it was coming from a Caribbean household, mom and dad, both from Jamaica and things like that. It's, not being raised as a Canadian, even though I'm from here, but raised from the West Indian culture, so you get to experience best of both worlds, and the rules that your parents put in place for you and, how to live, how to be a distinguished gentleman, have respect, and things like that. Not like a lot of these kids out here now, a lot of these kids are, lippy. They act like they're invincible. They don't care, you see it. They don't have that proper sense of direction. So, growing up, I look at it from that way. I was fortunate to have both my parents, just to really guide me and push me into the right way.
Yeah, and then parents both from Jamaica, right?
Both from Jamaica, yeah. Both from the West Indian.
So how was so obviously the West Indian culture, West Indian influence heavy on your life. How was that? Like, how was that in concurrence with also being in Canada, which is a culture unto itself? How did that? Was that? I don't want to say weird, but was it a shell? Is it a challenge to kind of have, obviously you're being from Canada and growing up there and then also having that West Indian influence? Because, of course, just like anywhere, just like here, if you're West Indian and you grow up here, you obviously have the American culture. And I feel like America's a little bit more kind of a melting pot than what I think Canada is. But correct me if I'm wrong.
No. And so I'll say this. Canada is very multicultural.
Yeah.
I think kind of speaking from the West Indian culture, like my parents, when they first came here, they never obviously experienced cold weather, and we get frigid weather over here. It snows a lot and it gets cold. It's comparable to like Green Bay, Wisconsin. You know what I mean? And when you see feet of snow and in the winter, you have to take your shovel and dig yourself out and clean off your car. And when I look at the States and you guys go crazy over a little sprinkled dust, very pixie dust of snow. And I'm like, oh, just please come to Canada. So winters can be an adjustment if you're from the West Indian culture coming over, migrating over. A lot of the foreign exchange students from the West Indies come over here to the big university in the city that I live in, University of Western Ontario. So, not really too much of a culture shock, because there's a lot of minorities over here in Canada. So we all know how to play nice with each other. You know what I mean? And, even speaking about Toronto's like one of the biggest, when you look at the West Indian culture and the foods and the ethnicities, and, it's just one big, barrel of fun, and I'll say this to a lot of your listeners is that try to come to Canada if you can. Take a travel, when everything, opens up the way it needs to be and the world goes back around. Because I tell all my networking guys, come to Toronto. Come to Toronto. It's amazing. The atmosphere, if you want to go to a Blue Jays game and, be a Jays fan and get some memorabilia, go right ahead. If you want to come over here and watch the Toronto Maple Leafs stink up the joint, well, go right ahead. You know what I mean? So like I said, I like being here. And the fun part is I got family in the States. I've been over to the States. I've been to, Jersey and little parts of New York when I was, mid 17, 18 years old and things like that. So, I've experienced, a little bit of America, but I'd definitely like to, come over there, parts of the West Coast, even where you're at. I got people over in Vancouver. So it's just a hop, skip, step across the border and, make things happen.
That's what's up, man. And have you noticed that Canada, I know for me, I can't speak for anybody else, but I know obviously Canada, our neighbor to the north, but it's always kind of just been there. I never really I've always wanted to visit. I've always wanted to go. But I've always kind of felt like, I'll just go whenever, it's just across the border. I'll always go whenever, right? Even when I lived in New York, it was always just, whenever, I'll make time. And, but I didn't know a lot about Canada. Honestly, I didn't know a lot of people from Canada, just, celebrities, people that you watch on TV or whatever. But hockey, obviously, if you're following hockey, Canada's the hotbed for hockey. So, but I didn't know a lot culturally, people-wise, anything from Canada. So do you notice that, because I know for me that's been the case, that since Canada's kind of come onto the cultural landscape with Drake, with the Raptors being a thing, and I know and I know those two things are somewhat related because obviously Drake has brought a lot of notoriety and spotlight to that team. But, just kind of with the rise of Drake and just, basketball becoming, big out there and a lot of basketball products coming out from it. Have you noticed that the exposure level for Canada has grown over the last few years?
It's grown dramatically. I even believe,
because I know for me, I didn't even know that Canada was such a multicultural place. I know you always hear about Toronto being, but I always kind of figured it it's just kind of like any other major city where there's a sort of a melting pot aspect to it. But you're telling me that it's even beyond outside of Toronto.
Yeah, it is. And it's funny and interesting at the same time how you said that, because I think it started a lot with Drake, a kid that was on Degrassi-ish show and things like that, and then spearheaded himself into the music career, around 2007, early 2008, and been on this run. So I think that when you think of the actors have a lot of an influence on the actors, music people, and things like that, like from Drake to Justin Bieber, just the two to name, those are two household names coming out of Canada. The Toronto Raptors, me not being a Raptors fan, everybody knows this, and I razz on that team and that organization, but that's another topic for another day. They've added also to the basketball culture over here, having Steve Nash playing the NBA and a laundry list of others, so Canada's always been recognized, but I feel like with now the Raptors winning the NBA title last year, it's a lot of focal points and a lot of eyes are on Canada and basketball right now. There's a lot of young kids coming up, even in my city, surrounding cities that are, it's going to be interesting just to see on a sporting level, especially with basketball, how that's going to look in the next 5 to 7 years.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, my earliest memories from a sports perspective in Canada, again, outside of hockey, which is totally its own thing. but just like I remember when the Blue Jays won in 92 and 93, but it wasn't so much like a cultural thing. It was just kind of like, oh, this great team that won, back-to-back World Series that just happens to play in Toronto, Canada. Like, so as a kid, I never really thought much about it, but like, I definitely will say in the last decade or so, from a cultural perspective, it's definitely kind of come into my purview. It's like, wow, like Canada's this like multicultural place. And not that I didn't think it before, you just don't know, right? You don't know what you don't know. So it's interesting. I do want to take a trip out to Canada. I've been
definitely, man, definitely. Wherever you want to come over, definitely. If you want to come closer to me, I'm pretty sure we can have some fun in Toronto. When I think of Toronto, the GTA, I didn't even speak about the GTA. You have Toronto and then you have the greater Toronto area. But the heart of Toronto, Yonge Street, you think of Eaton Centre Shopping Mall. You think about that long strip. There's so many things to do in that city, and I frequent that city. You don't even, I'll tell you right now, you're not going to drive around. You can either take the subway, you can take Ubers, because driving in Toronto, it can be a cluster, especially driving on the main busy places in, especially downtown Toronto itself, so it can be very daunting that way.
Yeah, no, definitely. I my wife and I, we've talked about it. I've talked about it with some friends about, where I'm at. I'm in Seattle, right outside Seattle. So it's about a 3.5 hour, 4 hour drive to Vancouver. So yeah, no, I definitely, I'm looking to get some more stamps on the passport or whatever, and so to speak, and broaden my horizons and visit some different places. So yeah, we'll see what the next year or two. Hopefully, if things get back to normal, whatever that is. After
exactly.
COVID.
So yeah. I'll say this to you: if you like the snow and you want to experience snow, I'd probably start in Vancouver.
Okay.
Try to hit some of the mountains. I don't know if you ski or if you want to take up snowboarding or any one of the two.
Nah, man. I've never skied. Not that I'm anti. I've just never had the opportunity. I'm not a big. I wouldn't say I'm a snow. Like, I'm not one of these people like, oh my god, I can't stand snow. It's more of like, I like looking at snow, but when I have to actually like live in it and work in it and be in it. I'm a typical New Yorker. Like, it's, I've just been used to dealing with it, so I don't think about it in that way. But now that I haven't had to deal with snow consistently anyway, living in the Pacific Northwest, it's more rain here than anything else. But I don't mind snow. So yeah, Vancouver will work. But no, I definitely want to make it out to Toronto. I definitely want to check out the different places and just kind of, just kind of learn from our neighbors up north.
The only thing about Toronto right now that's very concerning, and I will state this, is the amount of senseless violence that's happening. There's really? A lot. Oh yeah. It doesn't get covered obviously by the news, but in this whole pandemic, it's like every other day, it's either a stabbing, a shooting, a killing.
Wow.
And it's literally, Toronto is just a war zone right now with a lot of how do I say this? There's certain, I would say, gang affiliation, but also certain, like, I would say, rappers in the city of Toronto up in rappers. You can start looking into this. There's a DVD that came out in 2002 called The Real Toronto. And there was a group of individuals that shot all this content in 2002 and it released. And when it came out, it took Canadians by storm. And I believe a little bit of not New York, the stateside picked it up. And yeah, there's a lot of, it's very, very unfortunate. It doesn't get the coverage, but like, I'm talking, open gunfire in the streets and things like that. It doesn't happen.
Wow, I'm learning something here. Like, this is crazy.
It's not like all the time you gotta like have your head on a swivel. Yes, you have to have your head on a swivel, but it's a little bit of a little war zone. When you go to a day party, and I know one of my networking good friends also too, he went to, it was the opening of Drake's restaurant, and to be a social gathering, the grand opening, and then hours after, open gunfire right around that same area, you have to really wrap your head around it. You know, you think about Caravana. I don't know if you're familiar, if you've ever heard about Caravana, the big Indian festival. Like, if you're down on Lakeshore, Lakeshore Boulevard after 5:30, best believe you're gonna have to have your head on the swivel, because when that big traditional festival happens, you know, there's open gunfire because people bring their problems outside on the street, and innocent people are either getting shot at or shot up at, and it's quite unfortunate. You know what I mean? But
yeah,
all of Toronto's like that. You got to know where to go. There is some pretty rough places. You know what I mean? But
well, it's like any city. It's like any city. Obviously, you have great. I mean, you have places like that here in Seattle. I mean, you know, there's great areas. There's the places that everybody sees on TV and knows, like, wow. And then of course there's the underbelly, as I like to call it. So
absolutely,
yeah, no, absolutely, yeah. No, it's like anywhere. So, but I'm surprised. Yeah, you're right. It doesn't get covered here, so it's surprising. So I learned something new there. You know,
it's like a 10% of how Chicago is. You know what I mean? It's yeah. If you just follow the news, you go on, like I say, Twitter is my new newspaper. You know what I mean? You go on Twitter, and you pull up the news sites, because I always got to see what's the pandemic looking like. How many cases are in Ontario? You know, and whatnot. But then you see right underneath the headlines, oh, this person got shot at, and you know, this person's running. Like one of the headlines the other day was this young lady crosses the street. 2 young ladies cross the street, and a car out of nowhere runs one of them over.
Jeez. And
I'm like, really? This is what we're doing?
Interesting.
Yeah, man. It's unfortunate, you know.
So to add to that, right? Do you sometimes feel, because I feel like sometimes, obviously this is obviously the American perspective, but I feel like a lot of people romanticize Canada as like, oh, that doesn't happen in Canada, or this doesn't happen in Canada, or Canada is so much better when it comes to like these social issues and blah, blah, blah. So speak to that. Like, do you feel from like an American perspective, do you feel like Canada sometimes kind of gets romanticized in a way? Like
I could say so.
Okay, great. Yeah, let's speak on
100%. 100%. I think that not to the extent, right? Not to the extent of having like social injustice issues, the way that you have police officers gunning down innocent Black people in the streets. It's not like that. But racial profiling, it happens. It happens everywhere.
It happens everywhere.
It happens everywhere, my friend. Yeah. And, you know, it's not to the extreme, but it's there. You know, it's there. You know, when we have our premier coming out and saying that, oh, you know, Canada's never faced any racial issues, it's just like, buddy, where was the Underground Railroad? Like, are you like, pick up a textbook, bro? Like, pick up some history knowledge. You know what I mean? Like, things have happened here, but people tend to, again, turn a blind eye to it. You know, they want to talk about, you know, what the government's doing as far as funding. And, you know, when we think about the relief pay they've honored to, you know, people that weren't working in the midst of COVID-19, to now where our prime minister, which is equivalent to your president, is like, oh, well, you know, people that were they were committing, say, for instance, fraud, as far as, you know, signing up for this money and things like that, well, they deserve jail time. They passed the bill the other day, and all the other people in the government were like, no, nobody's going to get jail time for this. All that's going to happen is your taxes. You're going to get eaten on your taxes. So when you go to file your taxes next year and you've been lying about the money, be prepared. You're going to pay. But they extended what they call, quote unquote, the CERB, you know, the COVID relief benefit thing. I don't know the whole acronym, but you know, it's there and whatnot. So yeah, there's bigger fish to fry when it comes to, you know, over here when it comes to Canada, you know, and I have a different kind of take on life. And I always feel like with a lot of things that are going on, there's always another problem about to be on the rise, you know?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Just life is a never ending loop of things, right? So just when you think you're done with something else comes up. But this is why I like having you on the show, because you bring that different perspective, obviously. So obviously 2020, the story of 2020, when it's written, whenever that is, in a history book or in a textbook somewhere, will be in a lot of ways will be this pandemic, COVID-19, that has kind of brought the whole world to its knees in one shape or another. From your perspective, being a Canadian, how has COVID-19 impacted you, impacted your country, the way of life as you've known it and seen it before this pandemic? Just kind of speak to that, because obviously we hear them, every guest I have on, obviously American, they speak from their perspective and from a perspective that we all somewhat relate to. But I'm curious to see what your perspective is, obviously living in a different country like Canada.
Well, it's so crazy because it's like the universe is speaking, because I just mentioned this on a new episode that's going to be coming out on the Mitchell Port Unleashed podcast in the week. And with me, I thought it was the ultimate pump fake, because I was at work at my 9 to 5 and I said to a couple of my colleagues, I said, okay, I eventually feel our mall is going to shut down. Mm-hmm. And, we saw how things went around. It was like March 14th, March 16th. And I said, okay, all right, let's see how this is going to go. And then bam, when I viewed, and it was the Utah Jazz playing whoever it was that night, and they shut
Wasn't it OKC? It was OKC.
It could have been OKC. It's so long ago, man. That's like,
yeah, no, it's so long ago. Exactly, right.
And honestly, Manny, I said to myself, I'm like, okay, this is not a pump fake anymore. So what I did, and I'll kind of take a different approach. I didn't let COVID-19 slow my momentum. I used this time and I work 2 other jobs. I do my 9 to 5. I'm a health and fitness trainer, and I do my own creative element with my podcast and other things that I'm doing in the city, community-based. So I said those 2 things I cannot be able to garner my attention to. So I put it back into myself. I invested into myself. I invested into my craft. And I said I have a platform. I have a podcast. Let me attack it from this way. And one of the things I said, even around March, and I said to a lot of people that know me, I said we will see what happens after this pandemic, after when the restrictions start loosening up. What did you learn? What did you learn about yourself? What did you learn about the things you can do? And not because there is quarantine or lockdown means you have to lock your life down.
Absolutely.
Figure it out.
Yeah.
Pick up a couple books, pick up some resources, learning tools, find out something new about yourself. The only thing I struggled with, working out, it's a great thing, great feeling, but I can't be doing body weight exercises all the time. So, going out there trying to find online and on Amazon, is there any weights, things like that? So I'm like, shoot, okay, this is not going to work. Everything's sold out. So you start doubling, tripling, quadrupling everything up the way you need to, how you have to do your workouts. And I just kept investing in myself, and I raised my stock, the way I felt I could do it. And just reading audiobooks, self-reflection, self-development, and just pouring back into myself and realizing, well, I can't go to work. Yes, I'm still getting paid for work, but when I have to do my work, I do my work at the time. Zoom is such a beautiful resource. It's such a tool now, right. And yeah, that's kind of how it impacted me. And, I know some other people are struggling when it comes to mental health, and I'm not knocking those people, but I get it. Not everybody's maybe like a me or you, and doesn't have the ability to really inward seek. And I think when this thing called social distancing came into play, everybody used that thing called social, and they distanced themselves from everybody. I was a person that was reaching out to other people, checking in on people's mental health, because I'm a mental health advocate myself. I've done I've done 3 events now, 3 events, and the last one being the biggest one. And I checked in with those people, and, some people where you see shying away. And I said, okay, well, if you're going to shy away, that's fine. That tells me who you really are at the end of the day. You know what I mean? So it's about unity and togetherness, and not because there was a pandemic means you cannot unify together, So,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's an interesting perspective on it. I agree with you. it's interesting. And also, I think the caveat to the folks that are struggling, I think a lot of it also has to do with, kind of your your economical and your social economical situation. Obviously, obviously you and I, and upbringing too. But the point I'm trying to make is like, obviously, me and you have been blessed in that we haven't lost our jobs. We're still able to do the things that we like to do, and still, getting an income, and I don't know, and we can talk about kind of not to get too political, but obviously the differences between Canada and the United States from an economic perspective. But, me and you have been blessed. My wife and I, like, I'm fortunate. I say this every podcast. Like, I'm fortunate that I have not been in a situation where I've lost my job. I'm on unemployment. I'm waiting for unemployment. Like, I know people in my family that are currently in that situation. So I'm blessed. I get up every day, I turn the computer on, and I'm working from home. I'm blessed in that. My wife is blessed.
Amazing.
We've been able to pay our mortgage. We've been, like, all these things that, in a way, you kind of take for granted when it's a non-pandemic world, right? But, those things kind of come into more of a perspective when there's things like these happen. So I will say it's even easier for me, on top of all the other things that you mentioned, obviously having a good mind and not letting things like this kind of defeat you and bring you down. I would also say that has caused a lot of it too, because of course, when you're affected by the fact that you lost your job, in some cases you're a small business owner, you've lost your business, those things will definitely affect your mind and your well-being when it comes to dealing with this situation. Like, I know people that have lost their jobs. I know people that have lost small businesses. You're not dealing with social distancing and being locked up or in quarantine as well as I am, because of those things will affect you.
I'll sprinkle this one to you that's going to sound real interesting too. The ones that lost their jobs, but here's the one thing that a lot of people are not talking about: the ones that don't even want to go back to work and found a new passion.
Yeah, that's true. That is true.
And I've watched a certain level of just in when I say inner circle, not necessarily the people close to me, the ones that I work with. Oh my goodness, that's a whole nother episode. But I've watched some of them just up their stock just with the time, because I've always said this. When you have your job that you're focusing on, you cannot really focus on your creative side. And I'm not saying there's nothing wrong with having a 9-to-5, but once that part of the life shuts off, it's crazy what the brain and how, again, that word manifestation can come into play. As long as you apply yourself every single day to be 1% better, anything is possible,
Absolutely. No, great point. Absolutely. It does. It does absolutely affect that creative side. Absolutely. I cannot disagree with that at all. So talk to me. I'm curious because obviously we know the differences from Canada and the United States from a geopolitical, social, economic, all those things, all those facets, right? Talk to me about how people are dealing with this pandemic from a cultural perspective, right? Because here you kind of have, I want to say, three pockets. You have the folks that are like myself, that are blessed, that are still working, that are kind of using this, I don't want to say as a vacation, but whatever, for lack of better terms, using this as sort of like a minor inconvenience, a pseudo vacation of sorts, right? Then you have the folks that are kind of in the middle, that are, they understand what's going on, but they miss their kind of regular day-to-day grind in life. And then you have the folks that are really struggling from a mental perspective, from a financial perspective. They're the folks that, have not been taken care, the working class that have either worked in a gig economy, that have lost their jobs, or, have their jobs altered, or whatever the case is. And the government has not taken care of them. So how is that? So describe that situation in Canada. Like, do you have kind of some of the social economical strifes that you're having here, where the government's just, obviously we got the CARES Act here that didn't really do much. I mean, a one-time payment of $1,200 just was not enough for anybody really in this situation. So talk to me about it from a Canada perspective. Like, has the government done enough to take care of everybody in Canada?
Yeah. I kind of alluded to that when they released the acronym is CERB. So it's $2,000 a month. Right. In an allotted time period. Right now, there's been 1, 2, 3 payments have gone out already. Right. You had to apply for that online. Some people are finessing and frauding the system. But what I like what they did, what our prime minister did, he did it for the students also too, where they could get some sort of accumulation and funding, because we didn't talk about that. How's schools going to look? And I don't mean grade schools. I mean universities and colleges, right? So they don't know when they're going into the classroom. Everything is going to result, it seems like, to online. So I think they did enough for the funding. I'm fortunate with my job. They had a pay protection clause all the way up till June. And then they released a little bit of stuff, and not to get too political with that, they released a little bit of stuff after what's going to happen, because we didn't know when, when the mall is going to open up. And I work inside of a mall for a big kind of corporate retail corporation, and things like that. If people see me on social media, they'll probably kind of pick up, because I wear a lot of the branding stuff anyway. You know what I mean? But it's pretty. And I know that, though, I know when they hear that, they're gonna laugh, but working with that company, it's truly such a blessing. You know what I mean? And it's what they do, even coming out and having our CEO, be, on our, basically supporting us and saying that, the cliche quote unquote word of, we're not alone with this, and it shows how a multi-billion dollar company can really give back. And I know a lot of companies that were just like, well, see you later, bye. Go collect the CERB, or, figure it out yourself, and you think about gym owners, you know what I mean? And you think about how they're affected with that. You got to pay to keep the lights on,
Yeah.
You do everything into an online module now. And I've always been about online. So I feel like some businesses can capitalize with online. Some businesses can't. Right. It's like barbershops. So many people were, couldn't get a cut. Well, This is where you got to get talented, and this is where you got to get the clippers, and hey, set it on whatever level, and just shave it one level if you need to. So many guys I know, they just put the clippers and they just went lowest tone they can. You know what I mean? Almost next to completely shave their head. So hey, it happened everywhere, but I think some parts in the world had it a little bit better. And I think just being a Canadian and not knocking anybody else that was struggling, but we were taken good care of, and we still are, because they said that they're going to even extend the CERB, the $2,000 a month now, which I'm kind of like, well, phase 2 where I'm at, but parts of Toronto haven't even opened up. And I'm just on the little bit of the outskirt of Toronto. You know what I mean? So Toronto hasn't even hit phase what? No, they're going into phase 2. So it's going to be pretty interesting to see what happens. But you're looking at basically a couple million people in that city. You can't just open up everything and have everybody all at once. If you look at what happened a few weeks ago at Trinity Bellwoods in the park, people were out there in full force. Now they put little circles on the ground with like soccer markings. You have to sit into that circle. You know what I mean? So, the other night I had a chance, great friend. We connected, we went out for a bite to eat, and, we sat at a somewhat of a patio, had some steak, you know what I mean? And just, vibed out, and just be connected and, take in some of the nature's fresh air. You know what I mean?
And for those who don't know, obviously Canada is a constitutional monarchy, so they have a king and a queen that's kind of head of state, and then obviously prime minister, like you mentioned earlier, is kind of the head of government, or would be the equivalent of our president. And from a political standpoint, they are what you would consider kind of a democratic socialist country. So they have socialized medicine in a lot of forms of their government. And correct me if I'm wrong in any of this explanation for some folks, because you'd be surprised. A lot of people just don't understand
the king and queen aspect. So here's what I'll do: the king and queen aspect, no, but the premier and the prime minister being the equivalent to your president. But the thing is that a lot of people don't realize is that you guys have Republicans and Democrats. We have, we've got NDP.
Many political parties, right?
Yeah, we have the NDP, we've got conservative, we got the Green Party, and we got the good old liberals. And I know I'm missing one. So the Canadian listeners, when you guys hear this, don't fricassee me, please, for the love of
Right.
God.
Well, just a brief description.
Yeah.
Just a brief description. Just kind of describing what a constitutional monarchy is for some folks who don't understand. So you guys have the socialized medicine and whatnot.
Well, healthcare. I'm going to say something real quick about healthcare. Healthcare is not free necessarily over here. Now, this is where your benefits kick in. Okay, I had to pull. I'll just give people this little.
No, go ahead. This is good learning. Yeah.
I had a cavity on my wisdom. I had a cavity on my wisdom tooth, right? And so I had to get my wisdom teeth pulled. Now, to get your wisdom teeth or your wisdom tooth pulled, it can be a whole lot of money, right?
Yeah.
I've heard people paying $2,500 to do all four. I just had a cavity on mine, and it came up to like $500. But the joy of working, the joy of having benefits, it covered it. It covered 80% of it. So you kind of look at those benefits that you can have. Healthcare is not fully free. You know, you have to wait like any person out there to get a surgery done. Hey, if you want to go somewhere else, maybe to jump the line or skip the line, whatever you want to call it, then by all means. But yeah, we still got to pay for everything, but it's good to have a benefits package. If you don't have benefits.
But you guys don't have the minutia of having to deal with group health and regions and Blue Cross Blue Shield and
No, not really. I wouldn't say no, you wouldn't. It just comes down to certain things can be tough. Not everybody has an extra $2,500 to kick around to pull their wisdom teeth, you know, or, you know, we don't necessarily have to pay for surgery, you know what I mean? And things like that. But when you look at medicine and like, say, for instance, you know, you need to go get to the pharmacy and get some medicine. If you don't have benefits, that's when it can get very costly, because some of that medicine can be anywhere between $200, $300, $500, depending on what you have to take, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And you brought up something earlier that I found interesting. But, you know, obviously you brought up all the folks that are affected from this COVID and this pandemic. And I just wanted to add to that this is the other thing that this pandemic has taught us is how reliant as a society we are to the gig economy, to the gig workers, the folks that, you know, for instance, you know, barbershops, like underappreciated field, right? But what happens? We get a global pandemic where you can't go to a barbershop and you have to learn how to cut your own hair or whatever, you know, like now you have a greater affinity and appreciation for barbers. Absolutely. Same thing for folks that, you know, are in cosmetology, right? Like the folks that, you know, hair designer, you know, hair folks, hair designer, hairdressers, you know, nail salons and things of that nature, like all of these things that we're so reliant on for our day-to-day life, that I think that before this pandemic, you honestly wouldn't even have batted an eye. But now it's like you have a greater appreciation and a greater affinity for these folks. So hopefully that's a good thing that comes out of this too, is like that we have a general appreciation for these individuals that kind of fill a need for our society. And that goes through everything, you know, the folks that drive cabs and Ubers and things of that nature, like things that, you know, that have been severely affected by this pandemic.
Absolutely. I know a couple of people that took their insurance off their car because they're like, I'm not going anywhere. Yeah. So why would I, you know what I mean? So
I need to save every buck, right? Yeah. I need to save every little bit of money that I have. Right?
And it was so crazy because we went back to work on Friday and I watched some of the transactions I did. This is kind of this kind of giving people an idea here. And some of the transactions I've done, some people, one person, like I'm talking about anywhere from $1,500 to $1,500, you know, dollars of just items of just merchandise and things like that. And you're just like, yeah, they were saving that money. You know what I mean? They were saving that money. Yeah. And it's funny, you know, we're behind the cash counter. We're sitting here, we're just cracking jokes with the guests that are coming in the store. And I'm just like, hey, you know what? This is pretty interesting, you know? And so people are like, hey, I wanted to come in. I need to get it. I couldn't go online. I didn't want to go online. I need to come in the store and experience it. So, you know, it's kind of the fun side of things too.
Yeah. So obviously we can't go a podcast without discussing what's going on in the world from a from a racial injustice perspective, obviously. Obviously we're getting on week 3 now of just protests around the globe, which is amazing when you think about it. But protesting, obviously, the killing of George Floyd on a micro level, but on a macro level, just protesting racial injustices everywhere, police brutality, institutional racism. I mean, everything, right? So how, from your perspective, how has Canada been through all of this racial strife? And, kind of, you alluded to it a little earlier, but just kind of speak to issues of racism and institutional racism in Canada from your perspective.
Yeah, I'll take a small deep dive because this could be its whole other podcast. I feel like I could talk about this. We could go 5 hours. I really feel the energy that I'm feeling, in the mind, is how we're flowing into this. Here's how I'll say it. This is how I came into podcasting, speaking about social injustice issues. And when you have certain people in your past look at you and say, as a Black Canadian male, not to be speaking about these things, it really rubbed me the wrong way. Now, I'll allude to this. Colin Kaepernick, 2016. I watched that man create such a heroic, courageous sacrifice for the greater good. Being this modern day's activist as an athlete and lost his job.
Yeah.
I've stood by Cap. I've kneeled by Cap. I've done all those great things, spoke the message, never turned my back, been heavily echoing this on social media. People listen to the podcast and things like that. I've toned it down a little bit. I've scaled it back. I come now with a more teachable aspect with it, because that's what we need to do. We need to teach. So over here in Canada, again, racism is there. Racism is everywhere,
Absolutely.
The problem that I've had, and I've seen every single Black brother, Black sister get killed, gunned down in the streets through police brutality. Okay. And where I take this approach, 2016, when Cap took the knee, nobody was really out there supporting. Now, the caveat is George Floyd, knee in the back of the neck, he gets killed. A whole world is now rallying behind. Here in Canada, what I feel is, and I'm not going to really speak about Canada. I think this is now where humans need to take a look at one another. It doesn't matter the color of your skin. We can't compare what Black people go through versus what countries go through or people in the LGBT community go through. You can't do it. Those little black squares that people were posting on their social media didn't really create anything. It didn't really speak on anything. Mm-hmm. And what I see now is it's now being watered down. They don't want to talk about it, but they do want to talk about it. You get what I mean? And I think with humans, we are very picky about what we want to conversate about. I'm about the protest. I'm not about the violence. I'm not about the burning down the buildings, the looting. That doesn't solve anything. And if anybody says, oh, it does, well, then clearly I'll say this to them. How would you feel as a business owner and your store got looted and robbed? What would you then say? That's the fact of the matter that comes into play. So going back here now to Canada, I see that I've experienced racism. I've experienced racism on transit. I've experienced racism in school. I've experienced racism. I've been racially profiled. I've been pulled over by police, not to the extreme, not to where they have to, get to where they have to draw their guns. But, you get looked at a little differently and things like that. People cross the side of it when you're walking on the street and somebody wants to walk across the street and things like that. I get it. 6'4" Black man. You look at me, you think I'm a modern day Thanos walking around Earth. I get it. Whatever. It is what it is. But what I feel is what everybody needs to do. is put our thinking caps on. I'm not going to make this about what I'm about to say about black and white, but what we need to do is, again, hold each other accountable. And how we're having this conversation, I feel like I sound like I say this a lot, so I sound like a broken record, is we now need to be accountable. And if you're white, guess what? You have to look at the bigger picture and understand it's really, really weird why back in the days of slavery, we were treated that way. You have to have those uncomfortable conversations. I won't lie to you. I've watched civil rights movies with white people. I watch how they react. They don't listen, Manny. They're uncomfortable, right? They're uncomfortable. They're squirmish. Heck, I've seen a female openly cry tears of 12 years a slave. Okay. And I said, why are you crying? And she goes, why did my people have to do this to the slaves? And now she has a biracial child also too. She has a black kid. So she knows what it feels like. You know what I mean? Where we have to go as a society and as humans is, like I said, again, have these uncomfortable conversations. But I believe in unity as one, and we cannot flatline the conversation of Black Lives Matter, right? I've heard people say, well, in countries, in what about the Holocaust, or what about what's going on in Palestine and with Palestine and Israel? And I'm like, it doesn't compare. It doesn't compare.
Separate issues. And that's what annoys me. It's like people don't have the ability, and I don't say they don't have the ability. I think that people just pretend like they don't have.
They're picky and choosy.
They're picky and choosing, right?
They're picky and choosing.
It's a classic whataboutism. It's like saying, oh, well, that's bad, but what about this? It's like, no, we're talking about this. We all know that the treatment of the Palestinian people.
I'll say this.
And even the people that don't know, right? They should know. And I agree with that. They should. But this is not what we're talking about. Right?
I'll say this to you, right? And this is kind of where I get fired up, but I know how to be more reserved, is the ones that used to mock Colin Kaepernick and say, oh, what's this guy doing? He's looking for attention. He's looking for clout. But those are the same people that had to look at you in a Nike commercial, when a Nike commercial came out, and goes, I see the whole world really, really gravitating to what Cap is doing. But they have to say it so humbly. And it's like, well, maybe you shouldn't have turned your one cheek of what he was doing. Maybe you should have understood what he was doing. There's so many things that people can do now. Doesn't matter if you're Black, white, the youth is going to shape, I feel, again, how things are going to look now. But educate yourself with those civil rights movies. Google civil rights movies. Google things. Google Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Rosa Parks, Harriet Tubman. Google those people. Wonder why they were fighting the fight that they were speaking about. Muhammad Ali, Colin Kaepernick, all those other athletes. Abdul Roof back for the Denver Nuggets when he had his little protests and things like that. But we want to. This is what we want to do as some of us humans. We want to go on social media and chant things or post little
ride the wave. Yeah, ride the wave
for clout. Now, here's my thing about the protest. I didn't go out and protest. Why? Because we are in a pandemic and I have to be smart, right? I have to be smart. I don't want to get sick. I don't want to get people around me sick. I don't want to catch COVID. Well, here's a breaking news for you. Our health unit in Middlesex County, where I'm at, already said in that group protest that happened in my city, one person tested positive for COVID-19, and they want to do another protest June 20th. So here's the number. One person tested positive, and it felt like the whole damn city was out there protesting. Now I'm watching all these people in the pandemic, and I'm simply saying is that, did you all forget about COVID-19? Did you all forget about social distancing? Right. Did you all forget about your mask? No, we're just going to go out there and we're going to protest. I get the protest, but we have to be more mindful.
Right. Absolutely.
Mindful of the situation, mindful of why, what are we out here doing? You want to know how you spread attention? You have an Instagram channel. Do what Manny's doing. Do what I'm doing. Get into conversations. Listen, Instagram is the greatest tool. Zoom is the greatest tool. Re-record or record, however you want to do it, content and put it across your social media. Get different ethnicities in these conversation bubbles and have uncomfortable conversations. But, we rather, again, I say this all the time, rather go on Instagram and post ourselves sitting beside a beach holding a beer, or we want to post throwing frisbee with our dogs, or we want to post walking our dogs on a leash. But you don't want to simply talk about Black Lives Matter. No, you want to use this chant, "Oh, all lives matter." Excuse me? Mm-hmm. Doesn't it look weird to human beings that Black people have been oppressed all these years? 400 years.
I think a lot of it is willful ignorance. I think that people who have never had to experience, have never asked a question why, and they've just taken it out of their purview. They're just like, well, I'm not, I don't go through that. So, it's like you almost can't even, I think a lot of this is also empathy. It's like you can't even empathize with what a group of people is going through because you've never had to experience it. You've never had to deal with it. So the reality is that you yourself are ignorant to the fact that this is going on. Like I've had conversation with folks that literally lived because I love when people say this, like, oh, well, this person such and such has been around Black people and he's been around. I'm like, just because you're around them, just because you work with people, just because you may have a conversation or you share some interest with them, do you really know them? Do you know their upbringing? Do you know their culture? Do you know what they've been through? And it's not even so much just watching civil rights movies or doing those things, obviously, but just actually getting to know people, getting to 100%. Know the situation, going to visit these communities. You know what I mean? Like if you care and are concerned about systemic racism, I don't have to teach you a movie. I don't have to show you a YouTube video explaining what systemic racism is. Go to the hood, go to these communities that are underfunded and impoverished, that have been destroyed in large parts by systemic racism. Like you'll see it with your own eyes, and go to these community meetings, go to these rallies, go to these local board meetings where these ombudsman meetings and stuff like that. Like go see these things for yourself if you don't believe it, and you'll see everything that you need to see, and you'll hear everything that you need to know about it. You know what I'm saying? Because I think so many times we just pretend like we're in our own little bubbles, and I'm speaking this towards white people and people who don't understand it. Like they pretend like they're in their little bubble, and oh well, it doesn't happen in this side of town. Like I literally had a conversation with the guy and was like, oh, just to kind of explaining to him police brutality and blah, 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 blah. Oh, well, I feared for my life too when I've been pulled over by the police officer. I'm like, okay. It's like, yeah, but again, it just kind of speaks to that classic whataboutism and that lack of empathy. It's like failing to see and failing to understand how a group of people would feel persecuted and hunted and targeted by the same people that we pay their salaries. Like as a taxpayer, George Floyd paid Derek Chauvin his salary and then was murdered. So he basically paid for his own murder.
Yeah, basically, and when that trial comes out, it's going to be real interesting because those two had an interaction with each other. Right. There's probably something that was brewing from back in the day. Here's one thing I'll tell you, and I see it because I'm a forward-thinking person and I have my scruples about myself. I know that places I've gone since this protest is going on and Black Lives Matter, I'll say it. White folks are treating you differently. And they are. You can see it because they don't know where to tiptoe. They don't want, I swear, they feel like they don't want to say the wrong thing. Here's me. I'm a type of person to hold you accountable. I'll call you out. So when I see you trying to pick and choosy with me, I'll say to you, what are you doing? Just come out straight with it. Just be like, don't let what happened change how you're going to interact with me because you feel like I'm going to bark at you. I'm not going to bark at you. I'm not some ravage animal. I'm not going to simply tell you to go, F yourself or go about your business. No, I'm not going to do that, Manny. I'm going to simply, if you want to ask me a question, be like, listen, how do you feel about this? I'm going to let you know. You know what I mean? I'm going to break it down. I'm going to say, yo, I appreciate you coming up to me and talking. But there's people that are noticeably being very different. And
oh, yeah. Absolutely.
When you be different, it shows not being authentic. You're not being transparent. You know?
And also, I think it is also folks are trying to find, like you said, which way to tiptoe and like just what to do. Like, because I've had people DM me and say, "Hey, what can I do? What, as a white person, what can I do?" And I've told them very directly. I was like, "A, treat me the same as you would have before, and also be more outraged. Use your white privilege for good."
Thank you.
If you see this injustice like George Floyd or Tamir Rice or whoever, right? You should be just as outraged as I am. And use that privilege. Speak up. Use your privilege for good. Use your pedestal that you've been put on to bring light to these and have a zero tolerance policy on it. Like, Absolutely. This is not okay. This is not good. Like, speak up. And I've told every white person on my Facebook, I've told every white person on my platform, silence, you're complicit if you're silent.
I'll say this. You won't know how your black friends feel, or the closest way you're going to get to black is if you have a relationship with a black person and you're out there and they get racially profiled. If they get called the hard ER to their face, if you have a kid and your kid comes home and says, "Mom, Dad," you know, depending on the race, I'm about interconnection with people dating, you know what I mean? Interracial relationships. I'm for that because you get the best of both worlds. So when I see, if, say, for instance, you have a kid and the kid comes home and then the kid's looking at the mom and, say, for instance, the mom's white and she goes, "Well, I got called the hard ER." How does she deal with that? That's where you have to have that family discussion. Because if she's a single white female and she has a black kid, she's not going to know how to have that conversation. That's when you have to sit down as a collective bargaining agreement and have that conversation as a family. Not over dinner. Have that conversation. That's when you have to find the learning parameters and things like that, you know? And like I said, it's by the power of conversation now. You know what I mean? And I it's so crazy. And not to plug my show or take away from this, one of my managers actually personal messaged me off of one of my episodes and said, "Is that author you brought on your show, we need to get the book in our store." And I was taken by that. And I said,
awesome.
Okay. So we're going to spearhead change because there's an opportunity to have this conversation, because the company I work for is all about diversity, all about inclusion. Like, we did a whole 45-minute learning in the COVID lockdown about it. And I mean, pages of documentation before the whole protest even happened. So it's like, It's crazy how the world works. You know what I mean? It's like preparing us for what the next step is going to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. No, it's amazing. And I'll add, you know, we don't understand how much power we have as content creators. You don't know who's listening. You don't know who's paying attention, who's following along and listening to these shows. And, you know, I've been guilty of this too. I think sometimes as a content creator, as a podcaster, we get so caught up and we're so immersed in our own worlds of creating and being in that creative space that I think sometimes you don't ever get a chance to kind of step away and like actually look at what you've done, look at what you're doing, look at the work that you're putting out there. And you never know who's listening, who's following along, who's with you in this, you know what I mean? And maybe an episode, you know, who knows? Maybe somebody might take something out of this episode and do something good with it, you know what I mean? Or find what you're saying or what I'm saying and be motivated to do something, or start a podcast, start a movement, start a platform of their own, like whatever. And I'm very cognizant of that. I'm very cognizant that this microphone has a lot of power to it. So, you know,
now I'll do this because I'm going to jump down this rabbit hole. I'm going to play devil's advocate and I'm going to speak to your audience a little bit. Now, us as Black folks, we need to do better. We need to do better.
Well, when you say do better, what is, because, you know, obviously that's coded and folks will look at that as coded. And what does that mean exactly? Like, what is
do better means, as us as content creators, or you see Black powerful people with a voice, with a message, support what they're about, right?
Awesome. Yeah, absolutely.
Do not take the route of throwing subliminals on social media or tweeting about people on social media or making a mockery on social media. I see this a lot happen, Manny. And it's disgusting because from the outside looking in, when I see somebody criticizing somebody's body of work or not supporting that person's body of work, I support everything on my Twitter. I retweet everything that I see. Now it gets to the point where there's so many notifications that are coming through the phone. I'm not trying to talk myself up here. There's a lot of notifications. So I'll look at something and then I'll get sidetracked. But when I see the trolling, when I see, that type of things happening, it's like you're pulling on the strings of your brothers and your sisters that are trying to spread a positive message out there. You think about it like this. If we all rally together in our networking groups, do you understand the superpower you can make? Do you understand what you can do? It's like basically creating the Avengers, but Thanos is the actual world that we're up against. You know what I mean? We have a lot of people in this world, Black, that are doing some positive things in their community that's not getting talked about. We have Black content creators that are creating avenues for their business with clothing lines, with brandings, with razors or cosmetics and things like that, and going out there in the streets, in the forefronts, or making their ways on TV or bigger corporations. Support those people. Don't tear them down. You know what I mean? Rally with those people. Like, share, network, comment. Reach out to those people. Hey, what can I do? How can I get your message out even more? You know what I mean? Instead of just playing the crabs in the bucket mentality. It's not needed,
It's not, but I think that's also a byproduct of what we're talking about, is that institutional and that systemic racism. I think that's been for so long, that's been ingrained in a lot of us, is that this almost this need to try to compete with each other instead of work with each other.
Everybody wants
I'll even say it to myself. Like when I first got into podcasting, like I felt like when I first started podcasting, like I would have never did a show with you, because I would have looked at you as my competition, and I have to be better than Rory, or I have to be better than Jarvis, or I have to be better than whoever, right? Whoever's in our sphere, in our group. And then I learned, I was like, no, we can all do this thing, and we can all bring our own individual personalities and talents and traits to the table. Like me and you do a similar podcast, but you're you and I'm me. And, and we both bring something different to the table. And that doesn't mean that your show's better than mine or my show's better than yours. We're just different. And some folks will listen to this podcast, will listen to yours, and hey, I enjoyed Rory's podcast for what he brought to the table. They'll enjoy my podcast for what I brought to the table. In the same way, they'll listen to Joe Rogan's podcast because of what he did, what he brings to the table. Like, I learned that we're in this together. And I hate that term now because it's been so overused, obviously.
It's a buzzword.
Right, it's a buzzword, right? But in actuality, when you're a content creator, like, we're in this together, bro. Like, we're in in this journey together. So, hey, man, I had to learn that.
Yeah. I look at the powerful voices. You just said one, Jarvis. Jarvis is a beast. He's been on my platform. I've been on his platform. You know what it is about certain people, what I gravitate to, and I'll even say this about yourself and others, is that I look forward listening to the shows because I love to hear the deliverance. You know what I mean? If I can just lock in, because there's so many quotables that I'll listen to your show, or I'll listen to Jar's show, or whoever else's show, and I'm just like, God damn, I'm like howling in my house, like laughing. Like,
well, why did I think of that?
Tears.
Or why did I think of that?
I'm like, did this man really just put that phrase together?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So that's what it's about. You know what I mean? So like I say, I like, we all just have to just keep on, pushing forward and collaborate, and, competition. What's competition? What's competition? Everybody's got to learn from everybody. There's no gatekeeper to podcasting. The only gatekeepers there is to podcasting are the ones that are locking in multi-million-dollar deals. Call Me Daddy, Joe Rogan podcast, and Joe Budden's podcast. Those people, you can kind of call them the gatekeepers because they're showing there's an avenue, there's a niche for you to get paid for your voice. You're either going to do it or you're not. And there's other different ways to monetize your content, but that's a whole nother topic for another day, another podcast. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
So, there's a lot of avenues that are opening up for content creators, and I'm just just looking at, there's so much untapped talent out there, as far as podcasters or vloggers or wants to talk into a camera,
Yeah, absolutely, man. I mean, it's just so much untapped potential out there. I mean, you just gotta, and I feel like this is our time to shine. I said it, when I first started doing these shows, when the pandemic first kind of broke out, but, content I think I tweeted this and I said, hey, content creators, this is our time to shine. And I repeat that often because it's true. I mean, this is our time to shine. This is our time for our creative juices to get flowing and to us to do our best work. So
absolutely,
I've been very impressed with what I've seen and everybody. And also, like, this is, everybody asks, like, what can you do to start the conversation, support the movement, using these platforms, using these podcasts, blogs, whatever your vice is, whatever your niche is, whatever you bring to the table from a content creation perspective, use that to spark conversation, spark debate, bring awareness, use your platform.
So I'll throw this out here because I'm a creator by nature and I always look at everything creates an opportunity. I think all of the podcasters that are listening to this podcast, I issue this challenge on Manny's show right now. Create a little insert video and collaborate it in one big piece of how Black Lives Matter, how the Black Lives Matter movement matters to you. And heck, if I have to pay out my own pocket for somebody to actually, put the whole entire video together, there's different ways that we can create the videos on our phones, on our cameras. Let's actually do this. I want to put that challenge to the test because it takes me nothing to speak into a camera. 15-second insert, 20-second insert, 30-second inserts, identifying who you are, and let's put it together because that is how you do co-collaboration. That's how you get an impactful staple, put it on YouTube, put it on wherever, like the possibilities are endless. So
endless. Yeah.
Yeah. If people are hearing this and they take that, I'm going to say that right now. That's the challenge I'm issuing every content creator that's out there. That's a podcaster that's about to listen to this podcast.
Absolutely, man. I wish we can get into more stuff. I feel like we could be here all day. We could do like a 3-hour show.
We could do a 3-hour show.
Unfortunately, I can't do a 3-hour show right now. But listen, I think this is the first step in a long line of collaborations that we'll do together. Hopefully,
yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Hopefully the conversation doesn't stop there, man. Hey, man. Before we go, I'd love for you to plug your podcast again. Plug your social media. Tell folks where they can find you. Sell yourself.
All right. Well. It's easy. I'm on Twitter, officially Rory. That's the Twitter. Now, Instagram, I changed the handle to officially.Rory also too. So you can follow me on those two channels where I'm active. The Mitchell Report Unleashed podcast is everywhere. However you plug it into your computer, your phone, your tablet, whatever you're using, Heck, if you're using your gaming console, you have Spotify on your gaming console. You can find it there, the Mitchell Report Unleashed podcast. And Manny, it's a brilliant show. I'm definitely going to be listening back to this. Keep doing what you're doing, keep educating, keep pouring out the content, and I'll definitely make sure this gets shared, and I'll even repost it on my platform also too, and garner the attention that this show needs to get because you're doing some powerful things. You know what I mean? And stay up, stay lifted, stay healthy, and yeah, definitely. Like Drake likes to say, come to the 6 side and we'll show you how we live.
Always, man. I appreciate that. I appreciate the kind words. It means a lot coming from you. So yeah, man, I appreciate that, man. Wish we could talk more. I know we had some sports topics on there, but I just felt like the conversation we were having was more important and it was better than, arguing the NBA should restart or not. But we'll have time. The next time we'll have time to get into some
next
sports.
time we can get into that.
Well, and that is if we even have sports to talk about next time.
We'll have sports to talk about.
We'll see.
Kyrie, I'll just say this. I'll sprinkle this. Kyrie Irving, I get what he did. It's fine. He thinks he's smart, but he's not outsmarting me the way my brain works. And I'll say this real quick. He did that because of the current climate if they go back in the playoffs. That's how I'm going to look at it. I get the protest. I get it takes away.
Hey.
But think about it from this perspective. The Brooklyn Nets, he doesn't have his running buddy. He doesn't have his new tag team partner, his new shiny toy. He doesn't have Kevin Durant to come to the rescue. Because I did say this.
You are not the only one that has brought that theory to my attention. And makes sense.
If that team, I'm going to say something that's going to sound hella crazy right now. If that team gets into the playoffs with those two, I think it changes how the East may look. That's all I'm going to say. I think it would change how the East may look. Milwaukee, I still feel is the shoe-in to get out of the East. But now if you put Kyrie and Durant, things get real slicey and dicey out there.
Okay, well, that's a good setup for our part 2 to this.
Right.
And then
let me know when
in the coming weeks, man. I appreciate you being a guest on the show, man. As always, it's always an honor to have somebody as talented as you to join the podcast and contribute something to the conversation, man.
Yes, sir.
Before I get out of here, man, thank you guys for listening and supporting the podcast. You guys know where to find me. I'm on Twitter at @TheEmmanuelBrown. Instagram, The Emmanuel Brown, Facebook, Emmanuel Brown, Snapchat, MannyBro15. You can also follow the podcast on Twitter at AGS Pod, Instagram, AGS Podcast, Facebook, Any Given Sunday. Make sure you go follow and support AGS Nation. Yeah, man, it's just trying to do good work, trying to keep you guys entertained through these hard times. Hopefully you guys are staying safe and positive and all those good things. And once again, thank you for supporting the podcast. I know you guys get tired and of hearing me say this all the time, but without you guys, the listeners, supporting the show, providing feedback, I know Rory will second this. Without the listeners, there is no podcast. I don't care how dope your show is. Without people listening and tuning in and sharing and retweeting, there is no show. So I appreciate you guys for listening. I appreciate you guys for supporting. And I will get out of here for now, but I will be back next week with another episode of the podcast. For Rory Mitchell, I am Manny Brown. This is Any Given Sunday. We're out of here. Peace.